All right, let's go ahead and get started. There never was a time in church history where Gnosticism actually challenged the church. Despite every scholar, especially modern scholars, who make the claim that they were a rival, there never was a time when Gnosticism was considered a rival Christianity. Partly because the system is so incredibly complex and it borrows from just about every imaginable group around. But its redemption is so vast different than anything else that you'll see during this period. It just wasn't Christian enough to be a rival. Right? I want to talk about Gnosticism in kind of backwards way this evening. You all have received the write-up. Admit it's dense. It has a couple of places where I've repeated, make sure you see the theme that's going on. But it's a good treatment of what Gnosticism is. But what I want to do is get into a Gnostic document and show you just how insidious it is from the perspective of the early church. First, these are the only known names attached to Gnostics or Docetists. Like Valentinus is more Docetist than a Gnostic, but we'll put them together because scholars have attached them. Not too really. Not too many. Some of them are right, yeah, but again, it's still Gnosticism. I summarized Gnostic theology going too overboard in order to make this exposition simple. One, there's a transcendent and impersonal God who rules the heavens. As with those, this is a dualistic system. They believe that there are two gods, a wide God who remains unrevealed, and a demiurge or factor of the earth who mistakenly created the universe and is now trying to gain all its inhabitants for his own sake and offer that of the great God that lies unrevealed outside his domain. So this impersonal God, this God that cannot be seen, must be revealed, is the God of the Jews, the God of the Christians, the God of all religious traditions. No specific connection to which God it is. The material world in all Gnosticism is evil. We talked about this last with regard to Docetism. It's evil. And because it's evil, you have to wade through the good, discard the bad, and go through eons of the process of learning what it means to be a believer in your system. The lesser God rules the earth, the universe. The incomprehensible God is in the heavens beyond, where there is no physicality whatsoever. From my perspective, this is the saying of Gnosticism. Because you have to come to a point where I think it's irreconcilable to think that humans are in a world that's physical and that's the only domain there is. To think that we're in an eternal dimension when we die also is untenable. So it seems to me that this is the only sensible solution to those Neoplatonists who are maintaining that tradition in Athens and want to blend with it elements of Christianity and other traditions. Humanity has fallen from its pure spiritual state into an evil material realm. And from one perspective to another, from one angle or a different one, what's maintained is something like the created God slips into the domain of the all superior God, the unknowable one, and snatches life, little bits of life, little eons of life. And that's been put as a spark in every single human being. And that's not all far from what many people believe anyway, that there's a spark of divinity in all of us. Right? There's a spark of divinity in all of us. And when you have this arrangement where the all-knowing God is incomprehensible and can't see the creation because the material universe, not the one that he knows, you can look at the stories of Adam and Eve and realize, well, God seems to not know anything about Adam and Eve. He'd say, where are you? As if, God doesn't know. So he's not all-knowing God. He's an honest God, a frank God, a just God, a spiritual entity, but he doesn't see the physicality as a reality to his own domain. Now, that's Gnosticism. A spiritual realm separates God and the material realm. It's the plurality. And this is stratations or gradations or levels of insight from the supreme being all the way out to the extremities of the other, sometimes hundreds of these eons that you go through in order to get more aware of your place in the world. And the whole purpose of Gnosticism is to train people to go through that process so they can be aware of their spiritual existence in this new realm of light that they've been used through this process of eliminating all the various variants that stand in the way between God and righteousness. Always, and they're always right. Just the material world. Just being flesh enough, just being flesh is enough to make you fallen. And so does the God of the Jews. So what you find in Gnosticism and Marxism and Docetism is the God of the Jews is just but not loving. The God of the Christians is loving and just, and sin is the consequence of your actions. So what you find is in both Gnosticism and Docetism this desire to trace back the original notion of who we are, why we are, where we come from a universe unlike ours that's spiritual and must be revealed. It's a tough system to figure out. It's just lame. At times it's like that's the best to come up with. They did that in ancient Athens 500 years before. They didn't solve the problem then either. But let's get into it deeper and you'll see what happens with it. So the aroma is filled with inner beings. They're called emanations or eons. And there's hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Each become a name, like the closest one to the God, superior God is wisdom or Sophia. And the first one out is where the urge dwells, right on the cusp of God, the one that takes the spark of life and puts it in human beings. And therefore, once that spark is in you, you are actually enslaved in this world of the material existence. You can't escape, which means you die, which means you're hungry, which means you're sick, and you can't escape any of that without a calling out of this doldrum of material vacancy into this world of understanding that only Gnostic teachers provide. Evil archons, rulers, or a demiurge, or another name like that. A demiurge just means a fashioner of the material world. It's an old Platonic thought, Platonic term. And he ruled the material world. God sends redeemers upon occasion to humanity in order to reveal the saving notion. And Gnosticism is a blended term of knowledge and application of knowledge. So it's these people who apply the knowledge of redemption that's provided through this Gnostic, depending on which Gnostic system you're in. Through esoteric Gnosis, humans are able to find salvation, regain spiritual nature, and in the end, enter their place in that pleroma, which is this stratation enlightenment as you go through eternity. And finally, this salvation is available only to a number that's been limited, much like you find in Calvinism. The elect are the only ones that make it. And they're spiritual beings, and that's the name given to them, spiritual beings. How much of this reflects the New Testament? None. How much of this reflects Docetism? None. These are all very advanced systems. So I went through them, what I could, in order to narrow down to 5 different things that all Gnostic systems maintain. So bear with me because it's going to be a little general, but it's way easier than this. Number 1, there is an irreconcilable antagonism between this world and the same being, the non-physical entity, who is utterly incomprehensible. You know, by that, in theory. I believe it's incomprehensible. The only way you could ever know God is by revelation. God must reveal to you. This irreconcilable antagonism between this world and the supreme being, I have to believe in 2 realms of the world that I can't manufacture in my mind enough to see why that's helpful. It seems to me like a cop-out to create 2 gods rather than one God and human choice, which ultimately is the victor in all of this, Steve. But you can see on the surface, this sounds pretty reasonable, especially if you are seeking information through the philosophical schools. It seems reasonable. There's an antagonism between this world to come, or this world, Satan's rule. We say this all the time. But I do maintain that this incomprehensibility of God is one of the central themes that we have lost in early Christianity. God incomprehensible, period. God must be revealed, which is what Christ was all about, the revealer of Father. And we do this by defining, by theologicalizing, by using modes and vocabulary from Athens in order to try to make sense philosophically rather than look at the simplicity of the gospel message of Jesus became a man, represents humanity, and the consequence was both revelation and ascension and eternal life for those who participate in this system that is involving only your response to a simple message of Christ. And Gnostics could buy into that. And the reason is because Jesus was a physical person. And as a physical entity, you cannot expect Jesus to come from a physical domain in order to die in physical domain in order to rescue those who are in a physical domain. They found that absolutely incomprehensible. So they have to find a means by which Jesus does not die, but still represents God's messenger. So what they say, for example, 10 years ago, they found tucked away the gospel according to Judas. And in this case, Judas is the one who is the Savior being. Jesus shares certain thoughts with him. He tells him, listen, you got to kill me. You got to kill me. I have to resurrect from the dead. Very Gnostic in its form, the way that Christ can die, but the Jesus care must be killed because Christ is going to live on the cross. Hence, last week we talked about the gospel of Peter. The phrase was, my power, why have you left me? Why have you abandoned me? Now, you can, if you're a seeker or someone who is looking for answers to questions, these are very appealing as a primary approach. They become stale when you go past that first level, but the first level seems pretty sensible. Number 2, the soul, also called the spirit of the divine. This is a spark. That's not a concept. It's not divine. It can be snatched away. It can be taken away. But Plato certainly maintained that soul was immortal. It was eternal. And Plato would say that in 1,000 years after death, the soul reemerges and enters another person. So he maintained the immortality of the soul, which is what's maintained in their theology. All the creeds maintain the same notion, this idea that the immortality of humanity is based solely on the provision of Christ on the cross, Christ becoming a mortal being through his death and resurrection. If you allow me to go one step further. Jesus may die on the cross, but he doesn't die spiritually because he goes into Hades, remember? And he is in Hades, remember? And that's Peter's epistle. That's not somebody else's. That's Peter's epistle. Praise or saves those. It's in the flood era especially, which we'll talk about later this evening. That story especially is up in this preaching to the dead. But notice Jesus resurrects from the dead. He is a physicality to him. He also sort of disappear, materialize, and immaterialize. And Mary approaches Jesus, and she's out to grab him, to hug him, or what she's going to do by, approaching him. And he says, don't, I haven't seen the Father yet. Don't. He's a physical entity. She can see him. On the other hand, Jesus is walking with 2 of his disciples on leaving Jerusalem, and they don't recognize him at all. And they tell about Jesus to Jesus, which is kind of a nice twist in the story. And Jesus, that sounds interesting. I'm making that part up, but you get the sense that he's going on with them. And we don't know what happened to him, but he was a great man and he died. And when he raises the bread ticket, they recognize as Jesus and he leaves. As if Jesus can immortalize and materialize. You can see that issues are brought to the front in Gnosticism, because they want there to be a solution to the problem that reflects Jesus' experience, still require the teaching process to get through Gnostic schools. Anyway, this is more. Oh, that's okay. I'll fix it. It is divine. Sorry. You've got 2 gods. You've got 2 gods. And this one is ruled by a physical entity who is maybe mortal, is ignorant of the spiritual entity that dwells in the supreme God. So this is their notion of 2 gods, two domains, one evil, one good, and it's the dualism, right? And this is central because without that dualism, you would need to be navigated through the Gnostic system, right? The soul is fallen, it's imprisoned in the material world, it cannot break me. Well, that sounds like Augustine to me. By the way, next week we talk about Manichaeism. Our main focus will be on original sin because it came out of Manichaeism. Augustine brought it to Manichaeism. So I want to talk about that, about Manichaeism, which is the most complex of all the systems, the most widely spread of all the systems, and much later than these. But it's absolutely stunning how much of our theology was brought into Christianity from this movement. I'll tell you why this is important in the big picture, because Augustine becomes not just a central figure, but a figure of Western theology. And he was a man for 40 years. For 40 years. So some of that residue comes across in his thinking. He hasn't found a better way of resolving the conflicts that he sees, not in the church, but in everyday life, with the original sin and the condition of the humans. And all this is about the condition of humanity. The fact that we're a fallen being, or the fact that we are God, or the fact that we have developed systems in order to, shield the one God from the other God. All these other ways of trying to define the situation. Number 4, the only way to loosen the chains that bind the soul is through a divine call, or into the kingdom. Kingdom of light is a big theme, because each stage you get from the outer ring of the pleroma all the way to the supreme entity gets lighter and lighter, lighter and lighter, each leading to the kingdom of light. And so that's all about this journey you're taking through these various eons to get to an ultimate place where you are an immortal being, recovering from the spark you were once given. You had the fullness of being immortal. You cannot reunite with God in Gnosticism because God beyond human comprehension. Yeah, he sends revealers to explain the situation, which is, by the way, what Manny calls himself, Marcion calls himself. They're all revealers. We're a stage down the road away from where you are now. It's going to get better. Before we finish, you'll figure this out. These are the things that every Gnostic system maintained. And 5, the only way out of this system is through a divine element in humanity that earns from earth to the kingdom of light, and only Gnosticism reveals the method to get there. If you want to live forever, either your soul dies and your soul is enlightened and it moves on to the next realm. Because you're never going to know the supreme entity without that divine calling and restoration. And they all have various ways of this happening. And the Christian form of Gnosticism works solely through Christ. I want to talk about next. So don't get too hung up on these. They're not just ways of looking at the issues that Gnosticism was trying to address. It never made enough of an impact, although obviously the Christian form must have made some of an impact because everybody wrote against him. Everybody. All the apologists did. Irenaeus, the framer of Western theology, wrote an extensive work called Against the Heresies of the So-Called Gnostics, identifying the Valentinians, and it's a very fat work. It was just on the one sect. So it must have made some impact in some regions.
I read someplace that there was never actually a Gnostic church.
Never. Well, yeah, there were Gnostic movements with Christianity, but you're right, never unified, ever. And this also becomes a problem because they can't find ways enough to keep them together as a unit. They all are continually looking for individual approaches in this duality that they face. No. He sends the revealer. He sends the revealer, but the revealer does not die. Just as either rescued from the cross or the Jesus character died, but the eternal Christ continues afterwards. See this by the end of the night. That the scheme that they came up with is very, but just nuts from the theology. But nuts. Oh, well, Docetism there certainly was. I don't know any Gnostics that were much, but certainly Docetists. Yeah. Well, do you know about Montanism? We'll talk about this later next year. Montanism is the first major reform that comes out of Phrygia and the Anatolian, and they are a charismatic group. They are like the speaking in tongues group of the day. And the church shunned them, but they loved their martyrs. And they died for the cause. When you're willing to die for the cause, it does bring you to the fold. So they're not called saints so-and-so, but they are called martyrs, which is a high calling indeed. So yeah, Docetists would die for the cause. There was enough there in common, but you won't find that among the Gnostics. They're too busy drinking beer and talking how important they are, All right. This is off the sheet that we sent you. I think there's 3 pages. If you'll just let me to dredge through it, and then I want to get on to tonight's fun part. Because I knew you'd ask about the Christian Gnostics, so let's move on. Some Gnostic factions maintain that Jesus introduced the secrets of Gnosis to his ignorant disciples who often did not understand the message. Well, you know, that's the case. They keep asking, he said, what do you think he means? I don't know, what do you think he means? I think he means this. No, he doesn't. And Jesus says, excuse me, I'm right here. You can ask me right here in person. So they're ignorant of this system. The preferred period for revelation was during the 40 days between the resurrection and ascension. That makes perfect sense because that's when the Holy Spirit descends, right? And other occasions, especially the transfiguration, where Jesus is seen transformed into an entity that looks spiritual. As revealer, Jesus became incarnate in order to proclaim the human condition and to redeem the soul. However, in the Gnostic dualistic perspective, in which matter opposes spirit, good combats evil, and light battles darkness, there could be no incarnation, only an apparent one. So Jesus isn't really incarnate. He just appears so because they steal his body, or he relieves his whatever the word is, removed from the cross, and in that process is able to escape death. Because the spiritual Christ couldn't die anyway, right? Christ was detached from the material world, for adherents could not embrace the revealer comprised of the same substance that also imprisoned them. Therefore, Christian Gnosticism reinterpreted the passion narrative through metaphor and allegory without completely reducing it to symbolism, which was awfully close to only being symbolical. For most schools of thought, Jesus was a temporary habitation of Christ, the Savior, who descended upon Jesus at baptism and departed from him at crucifixion. Now listen carefully, because you can see why they could condone this. What were the words spoken to Jesus when he was baptized? You are my son, today I have begotten you. On that occasion, he became the Christ figure. What does Jesus say on the cross? My God, why have you forsaken me? That's when the Christ leaves the Jesus on the cross, and Jesus dies. So it's not like you have to go out of Scripture to see how these conclusions can be reached. It's the consequence that is problematic, right? The consequence. In fact, he did not actually die on the cross, for someone took his place in this particular strand of speculation. Furthermore, rather than the conventional role of betrayer, Judas followed a secret knowledge that revealed Jesus. And I mentioned before, Judas says, I don't want to kill you, but I must die. That's in the Gospel of Judas, which is the Gnostic text. Okay? The principal concern for most apologists, that's the early Christian writers of the 2nd century, was that some Gnostic system misrepresented the redemptive purpose of Jesus. In response, they differentiated between the true and false gnosis that the system maintains. For those who claimed knowledge remained ignorant of the genuine message of the gospel, especially its sacrificial aspects. There's no reason to have sacrifice if you deny the physicality of Christ and the physicality of the world, other than there being an evil God that controls it. Well, this fueled the fires of polemic. At no time was any Gnostic sect an actual rival to the church or any other religious movement or philosophical school from which it borrowed. So, Bob, you're absolutely right. At no time was there a Christian Gnosticism. In fact, it was Christians who called them Gnostics. Irenaeus did. He gave them the title. The main reason patristic writers denounced the movement was its notion of redemption, since it declared that Christ was an emancipating intermediary, one of many revealers. Christos was the atoned one, the anointed one, the selected one on many of these Christian Gnostic groups. Believers, however, were not the only segment of society that attacked these systems. For joining them also were 3rd century Neoplatonists, philosophers. For example, Platonius called them senseless. They used dumb jargon and overdramatic images. They're a bunch of pretentious elitists. Well, yeah, they were a bunch of pretentious elitists. One more sheet of this, and then I want to get into something fun. With distinction to the Gnostic model, the immortality of the soul and its relationship to the body were addressed in death and resurrection of Christ. However, the role of gnosis ultimately reemerged as a form of progressive speculation, and it could not compete with the redemptive scheme of the church. Ultimately, the church's system won because it was sensible. The divine element that you find snuck out of heaven and placed with men and women simply was unsustainable in Christian theology. Christianity ultimately shuns it. Because of that, they were quite victorious. Now, I know there's a lot of press, and by the way, today there's a lot of study on Gnosticism, and many are claiming it's the original form of Christianity. If I can comment on that for just a minute. And this is meant to be as ridiculous as I can make it. In 1906, when the first Lamborghini came off the plant, it was able to go 300 miles an hour without a single shake. Today's great models, like the Model A, starts up on a hill and you just crank it in and eventually it'll start and stop. That's what it sounds like to me, because Gnosticism was far more erudite and self-clever than it ever was. You don't start with something complicated and end up with something simple and end up with something complicated. It just doesn't happen that way. Gnosticism was overly complex, deliberately complex, because it needed healers to explain your human condition. So if a Lamborghini next to a Ford Model A, you know distinction. You may want the Ford over the Lamborghini, but you see the technological difference between them. And it's hard to explain the Model A. I mean, you can crawl inside that motor and fix it yourself. My dad one, by the way, not that it matters to you, but I'll tell you anyway. It would never start. Once it got started, it would start, and once it started, it wouldn't stop. But he had to crank it and crank it and crank it, and he loved it. That was his, that was his toy. So he parked it on a hill every single night in the morning. We could crank it and pop the clutch, and it would start. That's how I learned about popping clutches. And sometimes I would have to get boys out of bed and they helped me push it because the rain had stopped and slushed it in, and we had to push him down the hill and he'd start the car and he'd go off to work and we got there. And then somebody at work would push him again, pop the clutch, and then we get started and keep moving. That's not a Lamborghini. That's a full car. That's how it starts. And it seems like these people who want, modern scholars especially, who want Jesus to be a Gnostic revealer, ignored the simplicity and genius of Christianity. It's the simplicity that reaches all people in a sensible way that made Christianity have that staying power that Gnosticism did not. By the 4th century, Gnosticism, for the most part, is even though certain sects come along and in small ways affect local Christianity, not broad systems that cover entire spheres. When we talk about Manichaeism this week, this is still the 3rd century. I mean, this is the major Gnostic system to finally the Gnostic of Gnostic systems. While the problem of dualism was not fully resolved in Christian theology, the balance struck between the living world, you live in the world and not becoming a slave to it. Any residual influence of dualistic cosmology was rectified in the incarnation of Christ, who became the embodiment of heavenly essence within the earthly abode. After patristic writers and academic scholars began to redefine this doctrine, the church exchanged the mystery for the conviction of dogma, and that's ultimately what happened. Dogma wins these debates, and only among those in ivory tower and up in monasteries can open up Gnostic texts and that they still have some insight. And I'm telling you that because that's exactly what you have found in Nag Hammadi. In Nag Hammadi, they found a Gnostic library from the 5th century. So Gnosticism in monasteries was still going on, still teaching. And this group clearly opposed the church at Alexandria because it developed its own literature and borrowed from every imaginable source. This is the first Gnostic library that shows how much breadth there was in the system, because these are the Gnostic texts that were found at Nag Hammadi. And that's a definition I want to read. Nag Hammadi library, taken from the village in the Upper Egypt where it was unearthed, consists of 12 leather-bound Gnostic papyrus codices found in a storage jar. These 46 different tractates were unearthed in 1945. The Dead Sea Scrolls found? 47. These predate the Dead Sea Scrolls, and the only reason you don't hear about it is because the Dead Sea Scrolls are so spectacular. The scandal that goes along with the Dead Sea Scrolls. Otherwise, this would still be pasted everywhere on newspapers, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, because the Dead Sea Scrolls just overwhelmed it, and it's also because of the politics involved. You have the oldest Jewish myth now held in the hands of 8 Catholic Western scholars who aren't going to let the Jews have the oldest literature that they wrote. This is a real problem. Yeah, That's a real problem. That kind of scandal. And so people say, they're hiding from us. What's really happening? Found Jesus in here. Jesus the Jew. Blah, blah, blah. Nothing like that. There's not even a mention of Jesus. Nothing like that at all. These are for Jesus. Most of these documents, you don't know that. For the 4 years, they belong to these 8 texts, and the rest of the fragments not to release them because of the notoriety that they're getting. But these documents, they were published within 2 years. 2 years. You can rest on your own. Just astounding to me how much credence is given to this notion that Christianity was Gnostic, when anybody can look at this, and I'll show you an example in just a moment. Anyone can look at this and say, I don't think so. All right. Here are documents that are found in the Nag Hammadi library. Notice Plato's Republic is there. Documents of various kinds. The Acts of Peter, with an apocryphal work widely read, is there. The Apocalypse of Peter, an incredibly important work. It's the first doc we have in Christianity that describes the underworld. These aren't all heretical works, but they are a variety of diverse texts, as if you were smart because you knew that there were other documents attached to the apostles, which is no real good argument at all. The Gospel of the Egyptians, we know that was a very good text. Look at the other Gospels as well. The Gospel of Philip is very cool. The entire story of, Dan Brown's book was based on the Gospel of. The Alexandrian renegades who left the monastery to develop their own little cult in the desert. It looks like the first and only you found, it looks like it shows the diversity of the sources they used. This is not Magdalene. This is the Virgin Mary. And the other one I was mentioning, Dan Brown, when they finally get this case of Mary Magdalene, and they go to his house where he has magically the original text of these Nag Hammadi texts, as if anyone in a personal house is going to have these museums in Cairo and elsewhere. That's not going to happen. But it makes a good story. And it's all about the fact that Jesus was secretly married to Mary Magdalene, etc. Well, I can't tell you the number of books that keep citing this. It's over and over and over and over again. And it is found in the Gospel of Philip, in which it says Jesus kissed Mary Magdalene on the lips, hence they must be married. Kissing certainly doesn't refer to marriage, or Judas and Jesus would be married, because that's how he was betrayed. And there's a big lacuna in the text. That means a big space where that portion is just eroded. It has no reference at all to where he kissed her. And what we're not telling is the verses before and the verses following have a context to them. That is, the complaint of the apostles is he loves her more than he loves us. He kisses them the same way he kisses her. Why is a woman gaining that kind of credence among this kind of fraternity of Gnostic followers? That story is. There's no reference at all to them being married. It's the fact that she's a woman. I'll prove this to you in a few moments. Hang in there. Any other of these? It's fascinating to see the diversity of Jesus Christ. That's a very old Gnostic work.
I'm interested in Melchizedek.
Yeah, there's.
That's ancient.
Oh yeah, well, but they're recasting the story. For example, look at the Abel story. It's been told again and again. The Noah story is told and again in these Gnostic sects, because the antediluvian period before Abraham set the stage for all the transition of these documents and the history that lies behind it in their theory. But this is the document that first emerged, that was first published, is the most interesting of all the texts of the Nag Hammadi collection. Again, we're calling it a Gnostic library. It means this is likely a Gnostic text at its earliest stage, in which Christianity was retained and augmented with this new understanding of this Gnostic healing Christ, which I'll explain in a moment. Here's the title page. Many of you have seen this before, because it's one of the most famous title pages of history. It has raised so much and so much interest over the years. That's what the text looks like. The Coptic on one side and the Greek and English and other forms like they can be put in here. in the midst of it, but it's the English translation. And the translation's spectacular, hard to criticize. Leaf 1, leaf 2, all the leaves are there. It's a really well-preserved document. Did you want to take a bit of that? Here, let me scoot back. This will be the time you ever probably get this. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. 5 and 6. 7, 8. 9, 10. But you see, the gospel is really attacked. Okay, Gospel of Thomas may be separated into 5 categories. And I spent a lot of time adding these up to see how they're conveyed. 22 sayings are either variants or close parallels to canonical gospel. 114 sayings. 22 of them are nearly identical to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, primarily the Synoptic text. 28 sayings appear to be remotely parallel or similar in some way to the canonical text. 13 sayings contain parts that are parallel and parts that are not. And number 4, one saying that parallels traditions that aren't in the Bible, another canonical gospel. But 50 sayings have no appeal at all, no connection at all with Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. So this is a document real early with a number of texts that are drawn from the Synoptic tradition.
So I've seen comments that think that the text that is included statements that are nothing really problematic.
Oh, there's a lot. You'll see. I'll actually show you the Gospel of Thomas, English translation. Yeah, I hear this a lot. Oh, don't worry about it. It's nothing. Oh, no, it's big. See why in a moment. You'll see why in a moment. So I divide those for you. Here are canonical. These are the various sayings. Saying 21, saying 41. These are each of the sayings are chapters, are verses. Here are those with remote connections. Here are those with multiple parallels to various sources. And these are the sayings with absolutely no connection to the New Testament whatsoever. A lot of them. A lot of them. We talked about Oxyrhynchus, so I'll race through it, but at Oxyrhynchus they did find, here they are, they did find a fragment, a good page and a half of the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas. They didn't know what it was at the time. They called it an unknown gospel, and they sent it back to England, and the copy sold out, funded their program, so they went back here to continuing because of it. That's what it looked like. It's the Oxyrhynchus papyri. It's number 1. The number 1. Of all they found, that's what they published first. That's the fragments, what it looks like. And we don't have to read it because we're going to go through the whole document, but you get an idea that it's fairly consistent with the so it has come down. So this is all Nag Hammadi. The Gospel of Thomas is an endium of 114 logia, that's individual sayings. Without particular order, well, not arranged chronologically to theme. In fact, there's no theme to this at all. Just saying after saying after saying. No location. There's no Jesus then turned them out of olives and said, nothing like this. Some statements share similar content. It is not the only collection of Jesus' sayings from antiquity, or the original form of Matthew's gospel certainly was nothing more than a collection of sayings without a narrative. Thomas was unknown in early patristic literature. It's never cited, which means it was never used in church. Hence, asserting that an apostle was it is just impossible. It's untenable. There's no way that a gospel name of Thomas actually was in his name. The early church would have embraced it. The Docetic themes make it quite impossible to read from any of the 12 or the leaders that they appointed. This becomes clearer when the, quote, secret sayings of Jesus are disclosed. These are secret sayings that he only tells to Thomas as kind of the insider of the 12. If you'll look at this from a Gnostic perspective, why would Thomas be singled out for this particular gospel? Why would Thomas be singled out, not Peter or James or one of the other apostles? Why Thomas? Anything? Yeah, because in Gnosticism he was considered twin brother of Jesus, hence the name Thomas, which means twin. Therefore, the one dies and the other lives. See, you have this twin factor. That's what it was.
He's also long since gone.
Long since gone, and I'll look in the gospel where he's the only one that touches flesh. He insists on the flesh in the Gospel of John because the Gospel of John was written against the Docetic who denied that Christ had flesh. So yeah, he's the right person, easy person to attribute to this from the Gospels and from tradition. It depicts Jesus as a revealer of secret sayings and as a spiritual guide. His words, if properly understood and applied, result in eternal life. Gospel saying number 1. Those who read the text are admonished to continue seeking until what enables them to become rulers of their lives is discovered. That's number 2, verse 2. By this means they will know their true essence and their true legacy as children of the living Father. That's number 3. Its primary goal is entering the kingdom of light, and this only occurs through employing the proper methodology with view other than dualistic light and darkness and flesh, male and female dichotomies that hold humans captive to this world of Gnostic notion. Any person may become like Jesus through the application of revelation, but requires a hidden contents to be disclosed and utilized only through the proper sources. Number 108. And this involves specialized enlightened teachers. It's those Gnostic teachers. The Gospel of Thomas maintains that death and resurrection of Jesus were not real, and that salvation is personal and spiritual, for it already lies within each person in the form of an inner divinity, that spark that I was telling you about. That's number 70. However, if its principles are not embraced, then that person dies and there's no life that follows. So there's reason to want to be enlightened. Immortality. It also provides questions that require more than a series of aphorisms to explain. There's some really important questions that this document is trying to address within a Gnostic framework. I'll skip the rest of this because I want to go through the text quickly as I can. So here we got the Nag Hammadi text, and I want to go through all 114 verses. It's pretty straightforward, terribly lengthy, but you can see from what I've told you how Gnostic this is and the subtlety of this Gnostic approach. These are the secret sayings that Jesus, these are the secret sayings. Everything is about secret sayings that only the Gnostic knows. The one, the revealer, the only one who knows is that one who can open the reality of the world to this pleroma of gradation from the outer world where we live to the inner world where the kingdom of light is and the supreme entity or God is.
Got a question.
Yeah.
Did the Greek actually say?
This is Coptic. This is Coptic. Yeah.
The Greek wouldn't make that much beautiful.
No. Well, except this was this is John. This is exactly what the text says, though, because the writer wants Jesus to have a twin, so they thrust it right in the middle of the name. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's nobody in the West or East who ever considered this agnostic who wants this revealer disciple to be the only one that is the inside information. So not only is the name repeated, but secret sayings. These Gnostics are all secret sayings, and only ones who get a chance to know. Who else secret sayings? Well, I don't know. Cults. The same thing. There's a revealer who exposes the weakness in humanity in order to advance that person to another level of understanding. Jesus says, whoever discovers the meaning of these things will not experience death. It's a good place to start. A good place to start. There were some who we'll talk about next week who maintain that you will not die, and you can even stop eating and to sustained. I don't think that would last much more than a few months before it becomes interpreted symbolically. Yeah, a lot of claims are made. Manny says that he could hear vegetable cry when they come. That's some serious life force. Serious. So whoever finds these will never experience death. That's a good place to start. I mean, if you reveal something to me that only you know, immortality is where I want to go. Right? So it's a good eye-catching verse. Jesus said, one who seeks should not cease seeking until he finds. Seek and you shall find. Knock shall be open. Right? Ask you shall receive. For when he finds, he will wonder. And when he wonders, he will be astonished. And he will reign over the all. The all is what they use to describe the entire system, the Gnostic system, at its very core. You will rule over the Gnostic leaders. Just follow this path. Follow this path. Jesus says that those who lead say to you, look, the kingdom of God is in the sky. Then the birds of the sky will precede you. Sounds wise. If they say, look, it's in the sea, then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom of God is within you, and it is ahead of you. When you come to know your inner self, then you will be known. And you will recognize that you are children of the heavenly living Father. However, if you don't come to your inner self, you will dwell in poverty, and you are that poverty. Not sure what it means, but it sounds scary. It sounds scary. Jesus said, the man old in his days will hesitate to ask a child of 7 days old about the days of life. I got to wonder, I'm not sure I waste my idea on him. Nonetheless, he will. For many who are first shall become the last, and many will become the one and the same. It's a parallel to Jesus, first and the last, the beginning and the end. Jesus said, recognize what is in your sight, and what is hidden from you will be revealed to you. So you seek your soul and its immortality, and eventually it will come to you. Because nothing hidden that will not be made revealed. And this is exactly what you find in the gospel. Jesus reveals, and the Holy Spirit continues the process, and there's nothing hidden from us. And it's just a matter of having the life levity to just sort it all out. His disciples asked and said to him, do you want us to fast? Oh, I love this one, by the way. One of my verses of the entire gospel. The disciples asked him, do you want us to fast? And how should we pray? And should we give alms? And what diet should we observe? And Jesus said, in answer to their question, do not tell lies and do not do that which, for all things are disclosed before heaven. After all, there is nothing hidden that will not be revealed, and there is nothing covered that will remain disclosed. I'm sure that answers the question about diet. Except the following. It's pointless. Because Gnostics are ascetic. There is no food and wine being consumed here. The nuts and vegetable matter are very strongly ascetic until they go corrupted in the 4th century, 3rd, 4th century. Jesus said, fortunate is the lion that a man eats. I'm not sure we eat lions, but okay. The lion becomes human. Cursed is the man who the lion eats, because the lion will become human. Okay, well, okay. But it does take a Gnostic revealer for this one. When am I going to encounter a lion? And in what circumstances would I eat a lion? And you'd be surprised how many lions don't want to be eaten. You'd be surprised. Again, a Gnostic teacher could run with this. He has an insight here. That lion represents this, and the man eating represents this, and the human person is this, and the cursed individual. I mean, you could go on and on and on. You could spend hours on it because it's very cleverly written in order to spark conversation and more in-depth thought. He also said, the human is like a wise fisherman who casts his net into the sea and draws up from the sea filled with small fish. Among them, the wise fisherman found a large, fine fish. And he threw all the small fish back into the sea, and he chose this large fish effortlessly. Who has ears, he should hear and listen to this. I'm willing to listen, not all that willing to make sense of it. Any fisherman would have done this. Any fisherman would have thrown the small fish and kept the big one. Not sure good parable. Doesn't sound like Jesus to me. Jesus has more color in his parables than this. But you can see there's an attempt here to sound esoteric, without doubt. Jesus said, look at the sower who went out in the field and filled his hands with seed and scattered them. That sounds like Jesus. Some fell on the road and the birds came and pecked it up, just like Jesus in the Gospels, doesn't it? Others fell on a rock, did not take root in the soil, and it did not produce heads of grain. Others fell among the thorns, and they choked, and the seeds and the worms ate them. Others fell in good soil, and it produced a good crop. It yielded 60 per measure and 120 per measure. I'm not sure what that number is important. Apart from, there's something unique about this saying. It's almost identical to what you find in the Synoptic text, except the last line. Jesus said, I like this phrase, I have cast fire upon the world, and look, I'm guarding it until it blazes. Good Gnostic saying, love you till you die. Jesus said, this will pass away and the one above it will pass away. And the dead are not alive and the living will not die. What you ate was dead, made them alive. And when you dwell in the light, what will you do? On the day when you were one, you will become two. And when you become two, what will you do? Cuckoo, I am the wasps. It does have a rhythm to it, does it not? But you can see the mileage you can get out of this. A Gnostic teacher could for hours trying to explain the once, the supreme being that lies behind it. And that's what it would take. It would take a seeker wanting this ingenious understanding that only Thomas provides in this gospel. And the one who is describing it with great detail has the commentary makes sense and the application follows. This saying is just outrageously amazing to me. Those of you who have sat the story of James, the brother of Jesus, this will make sense to you all. Only because James is admired in all branches of the faith, including the Gnostics. For example, the disciples said to Jesus, we know that you will depart from us. Who then will be our leader? And Jesus said, no matter from where you are, you should go to James the just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into existence. That's pretty high praise, right? But James was a high praise kind of guy. He was the leader of the early church. So if you're going to talk about James and convince people he is the leader, indeed, he's got a unique character for whom heaven and earth were made. Pretty astounding. How many of you are convinced so far? But if you're a seeker and you want to know, this is the kind of stuff that gets you. You know, making sense of this. I could for an hour easily about James and why James would be the one that would be sent to save the world, except it's not what the biblical record says. Jesus to his disciples, compare me and tell me who I am like. And Peter said to you, you are a righteous angel. And Matthew said, you are like a wise philosopher. And Thomas said to him, my mouth will not at all be able to say whom you are like. Jesus said, I am not your teacher, because you have drunk and have become intoxicated from the spring that I have tended. Brilliant, beautiful, pointless, but beautiful. It does lead you to think something big. And this is why commentaries on the gospel are numerous, that you find major headquarters of Gnostic thinking like Southern California and Boston, these main centers where books are put out weekly, it seems, on this subject, because everybody has an angle that they want to interpret this work. Not one of them, I was going back to see the sect that created it to know if this is Gnostic or if this is Docetic or if it's a unique body of material that comes from the Jewish faith. Because you have this reference to James, I just couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you. I don't think anybody can tell you. But they'll write a commentary on it very shortly. He then took them, withdrew, this is the part, withdrew, and spoke three things to them. When Thomas, with his friends, asked them, what did he say to you? And Thomas said to them, if I told you one of the sayings that he spoke to me, you will pick up stones, throw them at me. Fire out of stones and devour you. That's a serious saying. I want to know this, lad. Don't you want to know the saying? Don't you want fiery rocks? Right? Again, don't mock it. I'm trying to show that if you're a seeker this is making sense to you because you have nothing upon which to ground it. If you believe in a ditheistic system in which the humans are wicked from birth, that there's no way to recover apart from this eonic advance from darkness into the kingdom of light, anybody could convince you of the meaning. Anyone could. And that's what they did. They preyed on those who were looking for an alternative to the church and its rigorous principles. Jesus said to them, if you fast, it will cause sin upon you. And if you pray, you will be condemned. And if you have alms, you will do harm to your spirits. Fasting, prayer, and alms, the three pillars of Jewish custom. Again, it sounds to me like an early Jewish Christian Gnostic work. Furthermore, if you go into any region and walk about the countryside, when they receive you, eat what they serve and heal the sick. This is right out of the Gospels. For what goes into your mouth will not defile you, but what comes out of your mouth, that will defile you. That's a saying I can buy in. You know? Jesus said, when you see one who is not born of woman, fall upon your face and worship him. He is your Father. Not sure I get it. Jesus said, perhaps people will think that I have come to cast peace upon the world, but they do not know that I have come to cast dissension upon the earth, fire, sword, and war. There also will be 5 in one house, 3 against 3, father against son. This is right out of the Didaches, right out of the early Christian Gospels. This notion in the family, there's a division of faith. And your faith is going to be divided because of this bifurcation between heaven and earth and the gods that dwell in their regions, and the seeker who's leaving from one portion of the pleroma to the other close to the supreme being, and endless examples that could be used. Jesus said, I will give you what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, what no hand has touched, and what not heard in the human heart. That does sound awfully Thomason to me. He was the only one who touched his flesh. Now, before any further, what this does do, though, is give you an understanding of what John is writing against in his gospel. It's these sort of sayings. Because this is more a Docetic work than a Gnostic work. Clearly, the signs of that Gnostic advance is here. But it's more Docetic than Gnostic, so it's early stage of Gnosticism. The disciples said to Jesus, tell us, how will our end come? And Jesus said, have you already discovered the beginning so that you're looking for the end? I like that saying. You see, the end will be where the beginning is. Fortunate is he who will stand at the beginning, for he will know the end and he will not experience death. That's a saying I'd want to know. The beginning and the end are the same place. It's been with you all along. The inner spark that's revealed to you after eons of research has always been there. Where you started is where you end. I like that. It's just garbage, but I like it. You know, bad theology, but I like it. It gives me a nice warm feeling inside. It's garbage, but I like garbage. Jesus said, fortunate is he who was before he came into existence. Remember, your divine spark plugged into a mortal frame. If you become my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will serve you, for you have 5 trees in paradise that do not change during summer or in winter, and their leaves do not fall. Whoever comes to know them will not taste. Is this not a theme throughout the work? Again and again and again. Isn't what everybody joins religion about is trying to find out how you become immortal and how to shed the sin that's having your essence so that you can become that pious person that sure is guaranteed a space in the next life. Well, this does too. Because the reveal is going to slowly take away from you every thing that inhibits you from fully participating in the fullness of this God, the supremacy, who is unknowable. Having fun? Interesting, right? right? The disciples said to Jesus, tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like. And he said, that's like a mustard seed, smaller than all the seeds. However, when it falls on cultivated soil, it produces a large branch and becomes shelter for the birds of the sky. I can see Jesus doing something like that. Sounds awfully close to Jesus. Mary Magdalene. Mary says to Jesus, whom are your disciples like? He said, they are like servants who are entrusted with a field that is not their own. When the owner of the field arrives, they will say, release our field to us. They take the clothes in their presence and in order to return to their field. Therefore, I say, if the Lord of the house learns that the thief is about to come, he be on before it. But this is not the Gospels. This is a Gnostic form of another story. So like I said, 50 of these are totally independent, but a third of them are extraordinarily close to the canonical accounts, which means they had to be written after 120 or so. 22. Jesus saw infants nursing, and the disciples said, these little ones who are nursed, like those who enter. Okay. He said to them, will we then enter the kingdom as infants? Not sure that was the theme of either side, but okay. Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the upper like the lower, and when you make the male and the female one, and the same, so that the male will be male and the female will be female, and you make the eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and an image in place of an image, then you will enter the kingdom. Man's high. But there's no gender in Gnosticism. It's irrelevant. You're a divine spark. There's no gender in divine spark. Shedding your femininity, shedding your masculinity would be expected in an ascetic system like this. And Docetism was extremely ascetic, as you remember with Marcion. They didn't eat meat. They didn't drink any alcohol. They avoided things that would be considered corrupt. So their living life that looks awfully redeemable, even though their theology is off the chart. He said, I will choose 1 out of 1,000, 2 out of 10,000. They will stand a single one. We all return to the domain of light from which our divine spark was taken. That's what's being in both of these verses. That we return ultimately to the place from which we were taken, the divine spark. You know, a certain comfort to that. That no matter what you do, you ultimately reside in the state from which you're taken. A certain amount of comfort, I think, if you maintain the whole system. The whole system. But you got to buy in the whole system, not just a portion of it, otherwise you will never attain, because the knower, the feeler. Oh no, there's no reward here. The reward is the ultimate shift from kingdom of light. Yeah, ultimately. Except you don't have that knowledge, the gnosis, you vacate your body and die. Only those who truly know return to the place, the kingdom of light. They might go as far as say a new world is created and the next phase of humanity advances. It's more likely. But yeah, same thing. The disciple says, show a place where you are, because we seek it. Now, it's a good seeking question. He said to them, whoever has ears should hear. Light exists inside a man of light. The spark is in a human who shines that light. And he shines it to the whole world. If he does not shine, he's in darkness. Well, that's pretty straightforward. The spark that is in, how do I say that way? I hate to qualify it, but I would try anyway. I think all of us like this concept of a divine spark. It helps explain why we're not animals or why we're not vegetable matter. There's something about a divine spark that makes me want to seek more. It's a very appealing concept. And this notion that the divine spark is that which all of us possess would bring about equality, and therefore no gender, no wealth, Nothing can separate the various seekers along this path back to the kingdom of light. Jesus said, love your brother like your own life. Protect him as you love your eye. Not apple of the eye, that's the other version. This is pupil, the pupil of your eye, the interior part of the eye. Jesus said, see the center that is in your brother's eye, but you not see the beam that's in your eye. When you remove the beam from your eye, you'll see clearly enough to remove the center. That sounds just like Jesus, because Jesus, right? Jesus' sayings, I got to tell you, man, Jesus' sayings are unlike anything else in history. You read it, well, that sounds like Jesus. Jesus said, if you do not abstain from the world, you will not find the kingdom. If you do not observe the Sabbath as a Sabbath, you will not see the Father. So again, Gnostics descended from Judaism pretty hardly. Either this a Jewish Gnostic or Jewish Docetic work like the Ebionites might write, something like this, because there's too many Jewish references in here and Jewish customs to just pass by. Yeah, I have a strong feeling this is Ebionite, which is the first kind of Gnostic Jewish sect to attack. They hated Paul. They despised Paul. This is not a single reference to Paul. None of Paul's epistles dominated the church at the time. So I've got a feeling it's an Ebionite gospel. And because we know that they had to know the Yom, we know that they maintained circumcision in the Sabbath. We know that they denounced Paul in all his theology. Jesus said, I stood in the middle of the world, and in flesh I appeared to them. So it's appearance. Just appeared. I wasn't there. I found all of them drunk, but I found none of them empty. My soul then ached for the children of humanity, because they are blind in their hearts and cannot see. For they came into the world empty and seek to depart from the world empty. And meanwhile they are drunk, but when they shake off their wine, they will repent. It's a good seeker moment. Jesus said the flesh that came into existence because of the Spirit, it is a marvel. The Spirit came into existence because the body, it is a marvel of marvels. However, I marvel at how this great wealth is taken up residence in this poverty. Poverty being wealth, poverty being held to this world through position, and the other being that abandoning it, living a life that's real rigorous, and one that's constantly seeking. How much time I've got? Let me jump through a few. 31. No prophet is except in his own village. No physician heals those who know him. Sitting on built on high. That's right out of the Gospels. If a blind man needs another blind, both fall in the pit. That's Jesus. To not worry from morning until evening, and from evening until morning about what you hear, about what you wear. God doesn't care. Remember, the daisies don't care, and they don't care. God dresses them. Don't worry about what you wear. Jesus said, 38, many times you have desired to hear these things that I speak to you, and you have no one else from whom to hear them. There will be days when you will seek me, and you will not find me. Again, another reference. The Pharisees and the scribes receive as if the Pharisees are still known among them. If this is true, and this is where my money's going, that this is epic, it's the only gospel from the Ebionites that truly have this system explained. They were indebted to Gnostic thought or Docetic thought. We know they're Docetic because Jesus is not a divine being, but a human being who dies and corrupts in order to redeem it, blah, blah. Like some of these, like 44, almost word for word, verbatim out of the Gospels. From Adam until John the Baptist, there is no among who's born of women who surpasses John the Baptist. God, this sounds like the Ebionites. They celebrated John the Baptist. this is the Ebionites. Just to show you that Jesus' things aren't just on their own. 47. It is impossible for man to mount 2 horses or to stretch 2 bows. It is impossible for a servant to serve 2 masters, otherwise he will honor the one and offend the other. Man drinks aged wine and immediately desires to drink new wine, and new wine is not put in aged wineskin. We crammed a lot of verses together in this one saying, right? So that it will not burst, nor is it aged wine, blah, blah. It just, a lot of bits and pieces put together so that the revealer can explain the context. His disciples say to him, when will the rest of the dead take place? Rest for the dead take place? And when will the new world arrive? He said to them, what you expect has already arrived, but you do not recognize it. That's as Gnostic a text as you're ever going to find. It's here. You're experiencing it, but you can't see it. You need a revealer. Circumcision is not beneficial or not. He said to them, if it were beneficial, their fathers would have produced them already circumcised. I love this statement. If it was important, God would have made you that way already. But again, it's Ebionitic. And if it is, then there's a symbolical meaning to circumcision being told here. Fortune of the poor kingdom of heaven belongs to you. That's Sermon on the Mount. I mean, you got to admit, it's very clever and provocative, which is what a seeker looks for. Jesus said, I disclose my mysteries to those worthy of my mystery. Your left hand should not know what your right hand is doing. Half of that's right from the Gospels. Again, the parable of the vineyard in 65 is retold, nearly verbatim. We're getting to the end here. Show me the stone that the builders rejected. It becomes the cornerstone. That's almost identical in meaning to the gospel story. Whoever knows all, if he is lacking one thing, he's already lacking everything. Boy, is that a Gnostic phrase. You can never get all, you get bits and pieces, but because you have bits and pieces, you have none of it. So you got to keep pursuing it, keep pursuing it, keep pursuing it. Destroy this house and no one will be able to rebuild it. That's nearly what you see. You know, in the gospel, I will rebuild it in days. A man said to him, tell my brothers that they have to divide father's possessions with me. He said to them, oh man, who made me an arbitrator? I wish I had that on a t-shirt. The other one I wish I had is, your neglect, not my emergency. Right? They're good platitudes. He turned to the disciples and said to them, I'm not an arbitrator, am I? Is that what I'm really all about? Just working out people's deals, families? There's more than that, isn't there? '79, I love this one too. A woman in the crowd said, acclaimed are the womb that bore you and the breast that nourished you. He said to her, acclaimed are those who have heard the word of the Father and have truly kept it. For there will be days when you will say, acclaimed are the womb that has not conceived and breasts that have not given milk. Kind of Gospels. There'll come a time when you'll say, you know, then you find that in the Acts. Again, the body. Here, if this doesn't make it Gnostic, I don't know what. 83, Jesus said, images are visible to man, but the light within them is hidden in the image. Boy, that's about as Gnostic you find. And the light of the Father will reveal his essence, but his light hides the image. Ooh. Clever. 85, as I said, they love the story of Adam and Eve. Jesus said, Adam came into existence from the great power, just like Jesus said, my power, why have you me, in the Gospel of Peter, and a great wealth, and yet he did not become worthy of you, for he had not been worthy, or he would not have experienced death. Foxes have their dens and birds have their nests, same stuff. Again, a statement Jesus makes about the Pharisees. Why do you wash the outside of your cup? Do you not understand that the one who made the inside is also the one who made the outside? It's 92. Seek and you will find, but those things that you asked me about in the past, I didn't tell you at the time. Now I'm willing to tell you, but you no longer ask them or no longer seek them. That's the copy of them. This text certainly dates around 20. Yeah, that's real early. Gospel on is just like 10 years then. That's early. And that's when the Ammonites first formed. No. The way we even, like I said, the Gnostics tapped into something in the soul that all individuals are. And the Gnostics would have found that to be shameful. 93? Do not give holy dogs. No, because I don't know Coptic word in it, but it's certainly dog. I can tell. The only saying that I know near this, because it's Gospels, but there's this wonderful phrase that Caesar made of Herod the king. He said, I'd rather be horse than his horse. I'd rather be his pig than his son. Play on word. Because you'd survive longer if you were a pig in Herod's family than if you're a dog in his family. Interesting. These are phrases that must be very popular on the lip people for those kinds of riddles. We're almost done. Just 14 more verses. Caesar's men demand tax. That's out of the Gospels. Whoever does not hate his father and mother, out of the Gospels. We'll explain that another time. Again, Jesus told the Pharisees. Now, the Ebionites are not Pharisees. They have problems with the Pharisees as well. They're like a dog sleeping in an ox trough, for it neither eats nor does the ox eat. I like the image, actually. Very good image. That sounds like Jesus to me. There's just something about it that spark, that's a wrong word, that resonates. Jesus says, come, let us fast, let us pray and fast today. Oh, they said to Jesus, come, let us fast and pray today. And Jesus said, what have I sinned? What sin have I committed that I have to be so weakened? Blah, blah, blah. Well, if you look according to the Hebrews, which we talked about at the very beginning of the series, there's a reference in that gospel where brothers of Jesus come to him and say, John's in town, John's baptizing, let's all go get baptized. It says, what sin have I committed? What sin have I committed? So this will be borrowing from other gospels like that, because we don't have full copies, we don't know how much is borrowed. And I'm surprised over half this work wasn't drawn from already existing written sources. Okay. 2 more pages. Whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me, and and I will become him, and what is hidden will be revealed to him. The mouth is an important delivery system in Gnosticism. Kisses. The kiss has a sacred meaning to it. Hidden treasure, we've heard. Woe to the flesh that depends on the soul. Woe to the soul that depends on the flesh. Boy, that's about as Gnostic as you get. The last saying is peculiar in the entire collection, because many scholars have said it doesn't belong there because it's Simon Peter talking and not Jesus, or the Thomas, the revealer. And Simon Peter says, Mary Magdalene should go away from us, because women are not worth life, eternal life. Remember, well, how can you make that statement? Because there's no either. Right? Men. So gender is irrelevant. So it's not an anti-woman thing, it's anti-gender. She said, look, I will lead her in order to make her male, so that she likewise may become a living male, similar in spirit to you. Every woman who becomes a male will enter the kingdom of heaven. That should be perplexing enough. And why? Because in whole count, gender is irrelevant. The law is irrelevant. Eating is irrelevant. Fasting is irrelevant. Customs are irrelevant. And now, gender is irrelevant. And it's on this note of the Marian tradition that was in these Gospels, like in the Gospel, has that full force of meaning, which is she's approaching Jesus, but it's not about gender. She's no longer a woman. She has been, the seeking person within her has been revealed. She ends her role, and she stands like men. As you know, because we had a whole class on Mary Magdalene, she's the most understood person in the Gnostic tradition, and it's because they refuse to let her have a role that plays that Gnostic revealer, because she has to be gendered, and she's the only one who's degendered. And turn to disciples and say, Peter must become a woman. Nothing like this. It's only about women, because women are seen as a harder convert than a male seeker, because of the functions that birthing does. You find several of these birthing references throughout the gospel. I hope that this was helpful. I'm not asking you to even spend 2 more seconds on it. There's nothing for you to gain except understand that Gnosticism was not a rival, but you see why it was strongly opposed among the Christians, because it's just insidious. There's a little bit of truth with a whole lot of deception, or a whole lot of deception and a little bit of truth. And it gets expanded and expanded and expanded with each statement until finally you can actually degender someone. And this is a real feature of the Gnostic movement. Next, we're going to talk about Manichaeism. It's the most impressive of all of them. It's about as Gnostic as you get. Jesus is throughout that whole tradition. I'll introduce it to you in bits and pieces, but I want to spend most of it next week on original sin. Oh, in 2 weeks. I'm sorry. Thank you. In 2 weeks, because we're not going to be Thanksgiving. Because this becomes a real important feature in the redemptive role that Jesus plays throughout this text. And Jesus plays this revealing figure. And I think you'll find it fascinating. But it's the last of that series, and we move on to something much easier. So I apologize for the intensity of the writing, because I'm trying not to write a 50-page document, just summarize. In the same respect, I like the way this flows. I feel like I've done my job, and I feel like I can move on now and not have to go back to it, which I think is something you may look at the text, read it a couple of times, and come up with the same conclusion. Anybody else have something to say? Was this interesting anyway? All right, thanks. See you next week. Hey, listen, we could still